We are now in the desert. The Torah was given at Mount Sinai. 40 days later, we constructed and worshipped a golden calf. And Moses had to go up on the mountain again to ask God for forgiveness for the people, which God granted, and made that forgiveness tangible by giving the people a second chance. Moses got a second set of tablets, and God then gives the instructions to build a sanctuary as God's way of saying, I'm going to live amongst you.
Honored, yeah.
The sanctuary is completed. Months later, it's dedicated. The Jews observe the first anniversary of Passover, and then they move on. And they come to a place, and they're ready to go into the land of Israel. And the people say to Moses, this land that you're talking about, what is it all about? Is it really such a good land? Could you send spies to scout the land to see if it's good or not? People ask for it. And Moses asks God. Moses was the only human being who was able to speak to God whenever he wanted to. Never had to wait to go into a trance and to wait till he goes to sleep in a dream. God speaks to Moses like he's speaking to his best friend. And Moses asks God what God says, and God says, I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you want to send the spies, send them. It's up to you. Which is very strange, that God should be undecided. God is usually, not usually, but always, do this, don't do this. What kind of a thing is this? If you think it's a good idea, do it. I'm not telling you to do it. If God would tell me that, I'd say, it doesn't sound like God is excited about it. And maybe it's better not. So that's a problem that commentators deal with. How could Moses think that was a good idea? And why wouldn't God tell him it's a bad idea? God is not bashful. That's one thing about God, that he's not bashful. He's very clear about what he wants and what he doesn't want. And we see how it happened. Moses selects a leader from each of the 12 tribes, and he gives them instructions what to look for in the land. And they go to the land, they scout the land, and they come back with a terrible report. That is, 10 of the 12. 2 of the 12, Joshua, who later on succeeded Moses, and Kalev, who was the leader of the primary tribe of Judah. But besides those 2, the other 10 come back with a terrible report. When I say terrible, I don't mean that it was all terrible. They praised the produce. They brought samples of huge grapes, huge pomegranates and dates. And they said, yes, indeed, it's a land of milk and honey. And here's the proof of it. Look at the fruit. Then they added one word, but. You didn't even need any more. You don't have to read any more. The most powerful word in the English language is but. Whenever you say something about someone, you could say the most beautiful things about this person is a genius, the kindest person I know, sweetest person, doesn't have a single flaw, but, okay, that's all you have to hear, something negative is going to come out. And that's what they said. They used the Hebrew. They didn't use the English word but. They used one of the Hebrew words, ephes. The word ephes also means zero. And I think, I never saw anyone say this, but it probably has been said, that when you say ephes, whatever you said before turns into zero. You could have said the most magnificent things, but once you add the word but, the rest of it reverts to nothing. It has no impact. But then they go on, but this nation, oh boy, are they powerful. The cities are greatly fortified. I saw the offspring of the giants. And Amalek, who started up with the Jews twice in the desert, although this is before the second time. So they had started up once before, lives in the south. And the groups live in this part of the land, this part of the land. And they were telling people that this is a ferocious land, a ferocious people, a threat, really life-threatening. At that point, Kalev silences the people, and he says, we're going to go. We can do it. And those people said, no, we can't do it because they're more powerful than we are. And then they start to go more into detail about how these people there are giants. We saw the Nephilim, these are the giants. We were like grasshoppers in their eyes. And what else do they say? We were like grasshoppers, yes. And then everyone starts crying. And people started to attack Moses and Aaron. And he says, we would have been better off dying in the land of Egypt or in the desert. Why are you taking us to this terrible land that we should all succumb? We should all die by the sword. Our wives and our children will be captives. We were much better off if we went back to Egypt. Then one said to his other, let's appoint a new head and let's go back to Egypt. And Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces because they by virtue of this response. But Yeshua and Kalev, these two of the 12 spies, rent their garments, and they said, this is a place is extremely good. If God wants us to take us there, we will conquer it. And the people wanted to stone these two tribes. And at that point, God threatens to destroy the people. And Moses again intercedes on their behalf. And what happens is that God says, any of the people, all of the people who cried between the ages of 20 and 60 will not live to see the land. And that's why they spent 40 years in the desert. They were supposed to go in soon after this, the events that preceded this debacle. They would have been in the land of Israel in a few days. But as a result, they had to stay another 38 plus years before they were able to enter the land. And not the ones who were over 20, only their children. So what we see from this story is how negative this whole episode of the spies were. So that makes the question even more solid. Why did Moses send them in the first place? And why did God not tell him, don't do it? The question becomes even bigger. The plot thickens. Moses renames Joshua. Joshua's original name was Hosea. And he renames him Joshua, Yehoshua. Why? Well, why did he have to give him a new name? Because Yehoshua has another meaning. It means, may God save you. May God save you from the counsel of the spies. In other words, Moses suspected them that they're going to come back with this terrible report. And that's why he prays for Joshua. Which raises another question. Why would he pray for only one of them? If he thought they needed his prayers because they were not strong enough, he should have prayed for all of the 12 spies. Yet he prayed only for Joshua. That's a separate question. But the fact that he had to pray for Joshua means he was afraid that Joshua might follow the counsel of the other 10 spies. Then why did he send them if he really suspected that they could go wrong? So the basic lesson over here is that, in fact, in life, God wants us to be in control of our behavior and not always rely on someone taking you by your hand and showing you everything what's right and what's wrong. A child needs that. But when you become mature, you have to be able to use your own discretion, your own understanding. And not only is that accepted, that's desired. So if God would have said, send the spies, they would have had to send them. That's a commandment. If God would have said, don't send them, they wouldn't have sent them, and they wouldn't have had the ability to choose to do the right thing or the wrong thing. God says, I'm putting this in your hands. Use your own intellect. Use your own discretion. Figure it out on your own. And Moses selected people who he knew were very smart people. And he knew they had the capability of using their minds to come to the right conclusion. Alas, they didn't. Where did they go wrong? Obviously, these people were not intending, as they went on this mission, to go against Moses, to go against God. God is the one who said that people are going to go to the promised land. So did they have in mind, before they even set out to go to this land, that they're going to speak against it and speak against God in effect? No. They just knew that they have to use their mind, and Moses wanted them to use their mind. Moses tells them, I want you to scout the land. I want you to see what it's all about. So where did they go wrong? When they went wrong is, when God tells you something, and he tells you to use your head, he's telling you to use your head to figure out how to implement God's will, how to deal with questions, how to deal with extenuating circumstances, how to deal with events that may arise that you didn't anticipate, how to draw conclusions about your methodology. He never gives us a right to decide whether we should do what God wants us to do or not. If God says, I'm putting it in your hands, it doesn't mean we have a choice. You know what? God says it's my choice. No, it's not my choice if I should do the right thing or not. My choice is how I should implement it, how I should tackle it. And if you look carefully at what Moses tells them, Moses is telling them what to scout, what to look for, see if the cities are fortified cities, if the land is a good land, if the land is a nice land. All these things, they had to use their understanding, their intellect to figure out how to accomplish the mission. But nowhere did Moses tell them, and I want you to draw a conclusion whether we should inherit the land or not. That was a foregone conclusion. That God says this is where they're going. But Moses, why did he want them to check out the whole land? Because number one, actually there's a few reasons. Number one, because unlike the experiences they had from the Exodus onward, everything was run by miracles. Miracles were rampant. The splitting of the sea and so on, the manna from heaven, the water from a rock, clouds that surrounded them and protected them. Everything was miraculous. But this is not the goal. The goal is not to live a miraculous life. The goal is to bring God into your natural life. So they needed the miracles because this was the beginning of their existence and they couldn't have made it on their own. But once they were going to enter the land, it was going to be done through natural means. Every now and then you rely on a miracle. What did Ben Gurion, who was very secular, say? I don't believe in miracles. I depend on them. And that's true even today. The number of miracles that are happening, some things are tragic, but there's so many miracles happening in Israel. But when they entered the land, they were supposed to do things in a natural way. So Moses says, well, if it's a natural way of conquest, you have to know the strengths of the land, the weaknesses of the land, the qualities of the land. So that's number one. Number two, Moses wanted them not just to fulfill God's commandment because God said so. Well, that's the basic foundation of doing what God wants. God wants us to enjoy doing what we do, to appreciate it. It should resonate within us. If you do something good, you can do it for two reasons. You can do it because it's going to be beneficial to you. You can do it because God said so. And God says, no, I want both. I'm not satisfied with one only. I want both. The foundation has to be compliance with God's will. But in addition to that, I want you to like it. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to appreciate it. I want you to feel, to identify with it. So that's why Moses said, I want you to see how great this land is and how easy it's going to be for you to conquer it. What they did instead was to take their own intellect and draw a conclusion that was never something that God gave them or Moses gave them the option to do. They were not supposed to draw any conclusions. But the message is that yes, we all have to send spies. What does that mean? The brain has to look at every situation in life and evaluate it. It's like sending a spy, sending your mind to a situation, see what the situation entails, and see how you're going to accomplish your mission. Not whether you should accomplish your mission, but whether you should accomplish it this way or perhaps a different way. Maybe you should invest this much emphasis on it, or maybe less emphasis and maybe more emphasis on something else that's proper and that's desirable. So we all have to send spies, and that's a positive thing. And God says to Moses, you know what, I gave you commandments, I'm telling you what to do, I'm telling you what not to do. This is your baby. This is your mission. You figure it out how to do it the right way. And God was telling Moses, in effect, it could go either way. But that's the challenge. That's the challenge. And Moses understood from God that God wants him to use his mind and to tell the people to use their mind. If they use it the wrong way, that's part of the risks that are involved. There are always risks. Why did the spies rebel? After all, Moses chose these people. They were his chosen people. So it means he chose people that he knew were decent people, smart people, but decent people as well. So why did they turn against God, against Moses and against God, essentially, because God is the one who told them this is the promised land? What was going on in their hearts when they turned the other way around? So the answer given in Hasidic literature is that these people were very spiritual people. And to put the lesson in a few words, Judaism, it's going to sound a little strange, is not about spirituality. It involves spirituality, but spirituality is not synonymous with God. God is not physical, but he's also not spiritual. He created physicality and he created spirituality. God transcends any definition. You can't define God. As soon as you start defining God, you're not talking about God. The only thing Maimonides writes, the only thing you could say about God, can you say that God is kind? No, because then you're defining him. God can't be defined. Can you say that God is not kind? No, that's also a definition. So God does not lack the qualities of kindness, but he's not defined by it, by that or any other definition. So if you define God as spiritual, then you're defining God. It's a much better definition than physical. If you want to talk about two people, one is a very materialistic person and one is more spiritual, well, that's a quality, but that's a human being. But God transcends those qualities. But God manifests himself through the spirituality. But when people take Judaism and the commandments of the Torah, and they say, I often hear people say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. What does that mean? That means that they're not really connecting to God. They're connecting to their own feelings. Being spiritual it brings a nice feeling. It makes people feel good. Some people take a drug, a physical drug, and some people use meditation as a drug. And I'm not against meditation. I'm all for meditation. But that's not the end. That's the means. The means of meditation and spirituality is to come close to God. How do you become close to God? actually not through meditation, but through fulfilling his commandments. To appreciate your closeness to God, you need meditation, you need spirituality. So spirituality is beautiful and we promote it, but the goal is listening to God. There's this famous story in the book of Samuel. King Saul was appointed king, the first king of the Jewish people, and he was given a commandment, not a pleasant one, to wage war against Amalek and wipe out everyone, including the livestock, leave no one alive. And King Saul spared the livestock. And when the prophet Samuel confronts him and says, "What is all this noise I hear of these animals making noise?" He says, "Yeah, I spared the animals so we can bring sacrifices to God." And Samuel says to him, "God wants you to listen to him more than he wants your sacrifices." A sacrifice is very important in Judaism, but it's the way to elevate yourself. But if you elevate yourself at the expense of listening to God, it's not really going to get you anywhere. You may delude yourself into thinking you're closer to God, but you're not really close to God. So what these people were into spirituality. And they realized that in the desert they could be spiritual. In the land of Canaan, which they're going to conquer and become the land of Israel, they won't be able to be that spiritual. Why? Because once they enter the land, they're going to have to fight wars. You can't be very spiritual when you're shooting your weapons. In those days, they didn't have guns, but they had other weapons. When you're shooting your bow and arrow, you can't be very spiritual when you're killing people, even though you have no choice. That's the commandment. You had to kill them. Even today, when Israeli soldiers go out and fight, and they have to kill, and they're obligated to kill, because it's self-defense. The mitzvah, the commandment to preserve life, overrides virtually everything else. And self-defense not only allows you to kill, it obligates you to kill. But you can't be very spiritual while you're shooting a gun. You're involved with taking a life. It's very uncomfortable, even though it's necessary. So in Israel, they're going to have to fight wars. Then they're going to have to start plowing the earth. And they're going to have to plant. And they're going to have to harvest. And they're going to have to work in earning a living. No more miracles. No more manna from heaven. No more clouds protecting them. And they said, this is going to not allow us to be spiritual. In the desert, in Yiddish, there's an expression called amachaya. Machaya means it's a pleasure, it's blissful, it's bliss. Why? Because they didn't have to produce any food. They had everything coming from heaven. They didn't have to worry about protection. The clouds protected them. Not only that, but the Talmud tells us, the Midrash and the Talmud, that the clouds did other things as well. What do they do about clothing? There was no Macy's in the desert, as far as I know. I don't know what other stores there may have been. I don't think so. But there were no stores. Where did they get their clothing from? The answer is the clothing grew with them. But what about cleaning their clothing? The clouds acted as dry cleaners. So the first dry cleaners were not the Chinese, but the Jews in the desert. And what about the hills and the mountains? No, the clouds leveled out all the hills and mountains and left only three: Mount Sinai for the Torah, Mount Har for Aaron's burial, and Mount Nevo for Moses' burial. Otherwise, the whole place was leveled. What about the enemies shooting arrows at them? The clouds deflected the arrows. The arrows wouldn't penetrate. So they didn't have to worry about their clothing. They didn't have to worry about their food. They didn't have to worry about their shelter. The clouds also protected. It was climate control. It was climate control, and they could. So what did they do? All these years in the desert, they were able to be spiritual. They could meditate. They could reflect on the greatness of God. They could focus on spiritual ideas. They could be philosophers and mystics. And that was their spiritual pleasure. They were living in another world. They were living in a world of theory. none of the world of concrete action. If you're talking about jokes, I told this joke yesterday. This rabbi who was known for his patience and for his tolerance of everything and never getting angry, and one day he gets his driveway paved with new cement, and some kids start dancing in the cement and messing it up, and he blows his top, he gets angry at them, he explodes. And his wife says to him, "My dear husband, you always talk about being patient and never getting angry, and here you're so upset." He says, "Yeah, that's when it's in the abstract. That's not when it's in the concrete." So these were people who were not in the concrete; they were in the abstract. And for being in the abstract, the desert was the best place in the world for them to be. They didn't have to worry about anything. So that's why they had a bias against going into the land. And especially when they saw how the land will demand hard work, they were not lazy people, but they were spiritual people. And sometimes being spiritual could be a problem. And God said to the people who cried, who agreed with the spies, "You know what? Your punishment will be you'll get what you wanted. You wanted to be in the desert, you will stay in the desert." So was it really a punishment? In one way, it was a punishment because the goal was to go to the promised land. But in the other way, they really were given because they really were not capable of entering the promised land. Personality clashes. It would just not sit well with them. They wouldn't be able to survive there. So it was more of a consequence rather than a punishment. Yeah. And one of the reasons Moses did not go to the promised land, there were pretexts why he didn't go. Later on, we're going to read about he struck the rock when he was told to speak to the rock, and there are other ways of explaining it. But the Midrash says that the reason why Moses didn't go to the promised land because he was the leader of his generation. And since his generation was not fit, was not suited for the land, Moses as the leader had to be with his people as a faithful leader. But that's a subject we'll go into some other time. You know, in Judaism, there's an institution called a Minyan. A Minyan is a quorum of 10 men to say certain prayers that are very heavy prayers, very powerful, require 10 men over the age of 13 in the room while these prayers are said. One of those prayers is Kaddish, which people say for the loss of a loved one. And how do we know that a minyan, that a quorum is 10? So one of the sources for that is the 10 spies who are described as a evil community, an evil congregation. So we know that a congregation consists of 10 men. That's why women, that's one of the reasons women are not included in the minyan, because they're not part of the 10 evil men. But isn't it a little strange that the institution of a minyan, which is to say prayers that are holy, is derived from people who are evil? So answer number one is that these people, though they were evil, they were still very spiritual and very holy. They were just misguided. They took their spirituality the wrong way. See, they didn't have much history to go on. We could look at them and say, how come they made so many mistakes in the desert? They worshipped a golden calf, they rebelled against Moses, they rebelled against God. They're doing all these different things. Last week's Torah portion had about a half a dozen different things that people complained about. They complained about the food. That's why Jews always complain. We have it in our genes. We like to complain about everything. But they were complaining about every little thing. Nothing seemed to go right. You know, with another joke, I didn't tell this joke yesterday. How do you know you're in a Jewish restaurant when the waiter says to you, "Is anything all right?" So these people are. How could these people make so many mistakes? And the answer is twofold. Number one, most of these mistakes, if not all of them, are based on a misinterpretation of something. Like these spies that misinterpreted the idea of spirituality, that's the ideal. Number two, they didn't have anyone to teach them. There was no history behind them. This is the first generation of Jews, of a Jewish nation, the ones who come out of Egypt. We have 3,300 plus years of examples of precedents. When you're starting off, you can be excused, especially when you have a spiritual way of justifying what you're doing, and you don't have anyone to learn from that what you're doing is wrong. So we have to understand that these people were, even in spite of the fact that they did something that was wrong, for them it wasn't as wrong as it would be for us if we followed in their example, because we know what the result was. We don't have their excuse. So that's why the Minyan, which is a holy institution, can be derived from them, because these people were not really evil in the sense that we refer to people as evil today. They had some justification for it, and they didn't have anything to learn from. The second point is the whole idea of prayer is not to come to God and say, God, you know who I am? I'm this great person. I want you to do this for me. The way King David in Psalms describes prayer, says, from the depths I cry out to you. You come to God in prayer coming from the dumps. I come to God and I say, God, I'm a nobody. I'm worthless, but God, you're great, and you could embrace me no matter how low I am. That's why it says in the Talmud, and it's in Jewish law, that the one who leads services should not be standing on the platform, which they do in most temples. It should be from the ground, or even lower than everyone, because you're calling out from the depths. One of in an Orthodox synagogue, the men and the women are separated. Husbands or wives do not sit together. There's a mechitza, there's a partition that separates between them. And I'm not going to go into all the different reasons and explanations, but to respond to one aspect of it, Rabbi Soloveitchik, one of the great Jewish leaders of the 20th century, once explained that people when they come to the temple want to sit next to their spouse. Why? Because they need the support. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said that's exactly the opposite of how you're supposed to come to the temple, to the synagogue. You're supposed to come there feeling I'm all alone in the world. I'm a low life. I'm hit the bottom, and I have no support from anyone. It's only you, God. That's it. I'm totally in your hands. Now, there's nothing wrong with having support, and you do have support because you have other people in a congregation. But you're not relying on their support. When you come to God, you're coming to God as an individual, not just as part of a community. And any artificial support that you need goes against the whole concept of prayer. That's his approach to it. So that's why when we derive the law of having 10 people, we get it from these negative people, because that's exactly what prayer is. It's coming from a negative place, from a lowly place, elevating yourself to go higher. Where is the model of prayer found in the Torah? It's found in Genesis, where Jacob falls asleep at a certain place. It happened to be the place where the temple would later be built. And he has a dream. And what does he see in his dream? A ladder on the ground, and it reaches the heavens. And there are angels going up and down. Now, this is a dream. So it's a metaphor. So what is it a metaphor for? So the Zohar, which is the principal work of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah, says that that's the ladder of prayer. Prayer is situated on the ground. If you're in the heavens, you're not going to pray. You pray because your feet are on the ground, and then you gradually go rung by rung to the heavens. And you go up, but you also have to come down, because you have to go back to this world. But the whole idea of prayer is to go from the bottom up, and that's why the model could be these 10 spies who were not so positive. one other point. When the spies give a report, they say that the cities were fortified. And the Aramaic translator of the Torah, which is the most authoritative translation of the Torah, written by one of the great converts to Judaism, known as Onkelos, he translates that the word fortified really means round. That the city, the walls of the city were round, or the structures in the city were round. What's the big deal about that? Why is that important? That who cares if the houses are rectangular or they're round? So a 19th century rabbi gave a very interesting explanation. In the book of Leviticus, it discusses the possibility of a building, of a house, becoming afflicted with a form of leprosy. It's a discoloration of the structure, and under certain conditions, the house has to be demolished. And it says that this was good news for the Jews to hear about. Why? Because when the Canaanite people discovered that the Jews are coming, and they knew that they're going to lose the land, they didn't want the Jews to get all their treasures. So what did they do? They hid all their treasures in the walls of the houses. So when a house became leprous and had to be demolished, they would find all the treasures. So you would knock down a house that was worth, let's say, $50,000, and you got treasures worth $1 million. So that was good news for them. But there's an exception to that rule. If the house is round, you don't have to destroy it. It doesn't apply to a round house. So that's why the spies said, you know what? The houses there are all round. If they're all round, you're not going to get any treasures. So that's why you shouldn't be so excited about going to this land. And there's a deeper way of understanding that, but we'll stop over here for now.